Bad words. Of course, we haven't had a show for a while because of the conference, and we can talk a little bit about the conference. And this is funny that there was a little bit of controversy because Jeremy Corbell used some bad words, and some people got a little upset. I think it was just one lady complaining, though, right?
Yes, it wasn't any number of people. I think there were one or two complaints, but that's to be expected.
Yeah.
I will point out that there were, and not that I got to spend all that much time seeing the presentations, but I did notice, it was very apparent that during Jeremy's talk, like his talk was the one that got the most audience reaction. And I do believe he did get a standing ovation, too. But people were clapping and hooting and hollering for him. So that energetic young blood, I don't think this crowd is used to seeing. So it's kind of refreshing.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of in your face. It's more just talking. But, of course, it was more, I think, which is our goal, And that's one thing to say. So a lot of the speakers, a lot of times we roll the dice. Jeremy Corbell, we didn't know if he would be able to even present at all. It's happened before. We've had people that don't have experience talking in front of groups, and they've done awful. And so that was kind of a roll of the dice. We just know Jeremy, and we've met him, and we love the guy, and he's so energetic and personable and articulate that if you watch his videos, his commentary. I love his commentary. I think we took a gamble, and I think it paid off big time because he did an excellent job.
Yeah, Jeremy did a great job not only on his during his lecture, but also on the panel discussion. Mm-hmm. And that was a lot of fun to watch. And I think some people got a little uncomfortable because it was a heated discussion. There were differing opinions, but that was what made it great. I mean, we'd love to remind people that's what the panel discussions are all about. They're about getting these people on a related topic, but not necessarily with the same opinions, because that creates this dialogue, that gets the discussion going, and that panel was a perfect example of that, and it worked really well.
Yeah, so to let people know, Jeremy Corbell, he talked about, these documentaries that he's done. He showed a couple for the first time, premiered them at the conference. They were great. They didn't win any EBEs, but they were really close, and they're really good. You guys should check them out. But he did a documentary where he interviews John Lear. He didn't show that one, but he did this one where he interviews this nanoscientist about some weird thing he found. But he also does one on Roger Lear and the extraction of an implant. He's also spent a lot of time interviewing Bob Lazar, some stuff that he's got online. And in fact, George Knapp, he used these interviews in his news reports to talk about the anniversary of Bob Lazar coming out about talking about Area 51. And so Jeremy really likes Lazar and his story. He talked about that. So really energetic, fun talk. And then we had a panel called a Whistleblowers panel where we had Mark Pilkington to talk about Richard Doty. We had Stanton Friedman to talk about Jesse Marcel. We had Jeremy to kind of back up Lazar and bring in John Lear if he wanted, but he didn't really go there. And then we had Ruben Uriarte, who has this case, the Mexican Roswell, where he's got witnesses there. And yeah, people were asking, asking me if I was going to debate Stanton about Doty. And Richard Doty, of course, people who listen to the show know about, this is where the roots to the MJ-12 document, stuff like that. So we did. We kind of had that debate at this panel, and so Stanton was kind of taking fire from both sides, because then he also debated Jeremy about Lazar. But it was a lot of fun, and I moderated, so hopefully I didn't want Stanton to feel like he's getting too beat up. But as you guys know, Stanton Friedman can hold his own. He can. He's a master debater. So that debate was a lot of fun. It turned out great, I thought.
It was so much fun, and you're right. Stan can handle himself. He was getting a little beat up there, but don't feel bad for Stan, because he's the champ. He can do it. He's a pro. And I love what Jeremy said. Stan and I, after the fact, said we should have just thumb wrestled.
Yeah, because and that was regarding this picture where they're both got their pointer fingers up and they're both like, like
wagging
making their point. Yeah, it's
yep.
so funny. So, and that picture was taken by Carlo Petrick, one of the helpers, one of the guys who always helps with the conference backstage. And I posted on my Facebook a bunch of his pictures. He took a lot of really great pictures throughout the conference. So I want to thank him, and you can check out those pictures on the Facebook. But, of course, the headliner was Bob Lazar and George Knapp. So George Knapp spoke about Bob Lazar. He's the guy, the journalist. He's still a journalist at KLAS in Las Vegas, 8 News Now. Busy guy, investigative journalist. So him and Bob Lazar were just in and out. But and then Bob Lazar did a Q&A with George Knapp afterwards. The conference went so smoothly. And there was a lot of people wondering, where was Bob Lazar? We even had some speakers who snuck backstage, and I had to kind of shove him out of the door and get him out of there. And I apologize, but, it was really hard to get Bob Lazar there, and I personally promised him that he would be able to come in, sneak him backstage, do his Q&A, and then get him out of there quickly, unmolested, not having to talk to anybody. And I was going to do my darndest to make sure that happened, even if I had to tackle people or get Richard Dolan in a headlock or something. Luckily, it didn't go that far. I didn't have to do that, but it went really smooth. And luckily, we did sneak him in and out, and people. I think we're kind of shocked because we snuck him out. I went to the front, and people, of course, were lining up and waiting to talk to him. And we were able to tell him he has left the building. So, of course, people were bummed. It would be nice if he would come and talk with people and meet them and take pictures and stuff. But he's just not into this field, and that's not what he wanted to do. And we were lucky to get him at all. It's the first time he's done anything like this, and I think it'll probably be the last, not because this didn't go well. He said it went great and he had a good time, but he just is not into this kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we're grateful for what we got. It was a historic event, but, that's his choice. He did have a good experience at the event, but like you said, he doesn't want to be involved in this. He doesn't want the attention. So he came to do what he did, and he was out.
Yep.
And we thank him for that.
Yeah, but otherwise the conference went great. I mean, we've had a lot of people there that we've interviewed. Linda Zimmerman, New York, she did great. Cheryl Costa, I thought, did really good talking about New York. I don't know. People love Joan Bird. She's so tall. She looked great on stage, too. I love the pictures. Her hair color and everything stands in contrast with the dark background. But, I mean, of course, Daryl Sims, Ruben Uriarte do lectures a lot. They're great. Richard Dolan, everybody loved. So everything went really well, and it was a surprisingly, well, because, of course, you and I are backstage putting out fires all the time and just paranoid and freaked out the whole time, making sure everything goes smooth and something else doesn't break down, or looking for the next breakdown to fix it. But it went very smoothly.
It did. It's still kind of shocking how smoothly it went. But yes, this year was a fantastic event, and looking forward to next year. Yeah.
So one of the other great talks I felt, and I was so excited for this, I told you guys this, and I kept talking about it, was Chuck Foltz talking about the Allagash. And that's what our interview is going to be today, not Chuck Foltz. But what we were able to do is I was able to Skype interview Jim Weiner and his twin brother, Jack Weiner. And both of these guys were involved with the Allagash case. And what this is these guys went kayaking in Maine at this area called the Allagash. It's on a river and there's some lakes. And while they were out there, they had a UFO sighting, and then, they had this really crazy sighting where this thing came up to them and kind of chased them, and some weird stuff happening. And then separately in regressions afterwards, they remembered this weird stuff. So really cool. So Chuck Foltz talked about it. And then we edited some of Jim Weiner and Jack Weiner some of their comments into the talk. So the talk's really cool where you've got all three of them. However, I really loved what Jim and Jack had to say, and I thought it would be great for our listeners to hear my entire interview this week with Jim Weiner, and then next week with Jack Weiner, the other brother, so you can hear kind of the similar events, but from these different perspectives. And I find, it terribly interesting. I hope you all do too. This is an amazing case, I think. I think this is an incredible case that deserves a lot of attention. I think it's on the level of the Travis Walton case, which of course is another great one. So that's why I want to make a big deal out about this, but also give you all of the information, because nobody's gotten, I don't think, as these full interviews. Ray Fowler wrote a book on it, but some of the aftermath that happened, and Jim Weiner and Chuck Foltz do talks once in a while, but Jim and Jack are both sick. They have health issues that prevent them from traveling much. So Jim Weiner wasn't able to make it to our conference, and Jack Weiner never makes it to any conferences. So it'll be the first time I think people have been able to hear from him directly. So we'll play these interviews, one this week and one next week, and it ought to be a lot of fun. I hope everybody enjoys it. So that's the show for today, but before we get into it, of course, it's been a while because, one, we had the conference. Two, I was exhausted from the conference, and you probably feel like this too, Jason. I feel like I'm stressed. Even after the conference is over, it's kind of like when you're on a roller coaster or something and you get off of it and you still feel like you're on it. It was that sort of thing. I'm still stressed, looking for things to fix, and it takes a minute to say the things after actually over, I can chill out. But I was so tired, I got sick. So I was sick last week or the week before, and so it's been quite a recovery, and I finally recovered. So now we're able to get some shows going.
Oh yeah, now the recovery time is pretty intense there.
Yep, but a lot of news and a lot of good news has come out of the conference, and a lot has gone on. So let's let you start.
All right. Well, I want to start with this interesting UFO sighting story that comes to us courtesy of MUFON and the Director of Communications, Roger Marsh, that we have posted on the site here. And this is a sighting that took place in Australia. And this is interesting. So there was a woman visiting her grandparents' farm, and she was talking on the telephone, and this was about 10 o'clock at night, and she saw this object. First she heard it. She said she looked up at the trees because she could hear the wind becoming stronger, and she heard a swoosh. And this is great. She described it like a whirlwind was happening. I'm guessing a whirlwind might be a term over there for a tornado, but I don't know. I don't know what else a whirlwind would be, but that sounds awesome. But she looked up and saw this object hovering over the trees. And then, if that wasn't enough, she saw that it was disc-shaped and had yellow and orange lights around it, and then a beam of light shot out from it. The light was, she said it was blue and white, and it came all the way down, and she was freaking out. Here's this UFO and it's shooting a beam, and she didn't know what it was going to do, so she got really scared. She got off the phone and went screaming into the house to bring out other people to show them, and by the time they got out, the object was moving away. But she's still apparently upset over this incident, and rightfully so. I mean, that's a pretty freaky UFO sighting.
Yeah, so pretty crazy.
Yeah. Unfortunately, no photo or video to go along with it, but the testimony and the story of a beam of light shooting down from a UFO is pretty fascinating. Yeah.
And people get upset when there's not pictures or videos sometimes, but, even when there are pictures or videos, they're often not very clear. You and I often, and others, debunk them. So it's like, witness testimony is really important. In fact, we just posted another MUFON case, a video case, where you can't tell a lot from the video, kind of interesting, over where you are now in Boise, Idaho. But what was interesting is the witness testimony, because there were 3 groups of people that witnessed this thing and reported separately and reported the same thing, which, I mean, it's the witness testimony that's more important than the video often.
Right, especially when you have corroborating evidence. And in that case, 3 different witnesses, and they were able to more or less triangulate where the object most likely was. Yeah, that's fascinating. And you're right. I mean, and in this day and age where people just look at a photo and that's it, we post things to social media that we've written about. People just look at the photo and they're done. And a lot of times they'll look at a photo and go, Chinese lanterns, and they move on and don't bother to read the story.
Yeah.
So, yeah, photos are good and photos are bad.
Yeah.
You can't win.
So a couple of stories that came out of the conference, or were supposed to. One did, I guess, but one of them is that Thomas Reed and his abduction case was inducted by the Great Barrington Historical Society and Museum. They said they believed the case to be historically significant and true. So really interesting. He had shown us this before he came to the conference. He was one of the speakers, and he said he was going to reveal it at the conference, but he really couldn't wait, and he put it on Facebook and everything before the conference, which is fine. I mean, he was really excited about it, and rightfully so. It's kind of an exciting thing. But more news has come out about it since, and the director of the museum really stands by it, and she says, he's taken a polygraph, the family members who were involved with this case, this abduction case, and so she just stands by it. She says it's true and it's a real story, and that's why we inducted it into the Historical Society. So that's pretty cool. Pretty interesting, huh? That especially a mainstream museum would stand by something like that.
It is interesting when this stuff happens, when, these mainstream public sort of bodies of authority or whatever come out and make a claim like that. It reminded me of the commemoration of the Betty and Barney Hill experience in New Hampshire, where they set up a historical marker.
Yeah.
That stuff's really cool.
Yeah, it is cool. So another piece of news, of course, we've had John Burroughs on and Pat Frasconia, his lawyer, John Burroughs being a Rendlesham witness. But something they released at the conference was that he got his medical benefits. So he's had health issues, in particular heart problems, that he feels could stem from possible radiation from the UFO he saw in 1980 in the UK at the Rendlesham Forest incident. And he, of course, has later found UK documents that speculated that they may have been affected by UFO radiation. And so finally he got his benefits, and he's saying that by the government giving him his benefits, they are acknowledging that he was injured by a UFO. And so that was their press release. They've gotten a little bit of news, the Daily Mirror and stuff, but it's really cool that he got this and his benefits. But they say that his medical records remain classified. So Pat Frascona told us that before. It's not unusual for someone who has classified medical records to get their benefits without getting the medical records. However, in those cases, he said, they know this person was working on classified work. Burroughs was not working on classified work, so why are they classifying his records from during this UFO sighting? It's a still outstanding question. He also received UFO Researcher of the Year because he found this documentation in the UK documents, and also because of FOIA's and getting the UK government to admit they did not release all of the UFO files like they said they did. So you could see a video on our YouTube of him getting the award and a video that goes over his story and why he's won it and everything he's done, that is narrated by Jason McClellan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was great to have both of these guys at the conference, and the Rendlesham case is so fascinating because it's one that continues to evolve, and I think it's an example of how bad of an idea it is for governments to try to conceal information, because information eventually comes out, and we're seeing that with this case.
Yeah.
But it was. It was great meeting Pat, too. Pat's a great guy, so I'm glad we got to meet him in person, and you've had him on the show before. But it was fun because he actually wanted a photo with me, so I was happy to oblige.
Yeah, he's a really cool guy. Very intelligent, too. Nice guy, articulate, and very intelligent guy, so really cool. Another one, a story that came out of the conference, really, well, not a story, but an interview we were able to get. We were able to meet Adam Dew. who is the owner of the Roswell alien slides. Of course, Jaime Maussan was at our conference, and he talked about these slides, and he also introduced Adam Dew to the crowd. And because Jaime is going to host the unveiling of these slides that they believe may be an alien from Roswell that they received. And so I was able to talk to Adam Dew at the conference, and then I interviewed him recently and wrote it up in a story. In fact, this would have been a radio interview here, but I was so sick, my voice, I could barely talk. In fact, I lost my voice that night, because this was Friday. I didn't even come to work last Friday. I was feeling terrible. So I did a written interview about this, and we've posted it online, but we were able to talk to him about some of the controversy. So, for instance, we had posted where Frank Warren had taken a still. So I didn't know this. So, Jason, you and I were talking about this great documentary that looks like it's going to be made, and this trailer for a documentary that Jaime had, or that was part of the release of these, announcing that the slides would be shown in May. Adam Dew is the guy who is making that documentary. So he's the editor, and it's his production company that's making the documentary and owns the slides. It's a scene from this documentary where they're looking at a slide that Frank Warren took that slide that you could kind of just barely see on this and blew it up so we could get a more clearer image of the slide. And a lot of people feel that it looks similar to these mummies of children. And what I did find out is Adam says he disagrees, and one of the mummies that they think it looks like has a hole in its side, and people think there's a hole in the side in the slide, but he said it doesn't have a hole in its side. And I posted a picture, but the pictures of the mummies do look very similar to the Roswell alien slides. The owners, the people who took the picture, have passed away, so we can't ask them what is in the slides. But what is worrisome, and a lot of people, researchers are feeling, is that if it looks so similar to one of these mummies, how can you prove that it's not? And I asked Adam to do that question too, and he said, well, we had a Roswell witness that we got, with the help of Don Schmidt and Tom Carey, and he says that it looks like the aliens that he saw. So, but if that's all you got, that's not a whole lot, really, huh? What do you think?
Right. I mean, you're not going to be able to conclusively determine what is in the photo. You can date them, which they've done. That'll tell you something. But other than that, yeah, I mean, some people think it looks like these mummies, and some people will think it looks like a Roswell alien. I mean, that's what you've got. So it is what it is. It'll be interesting to see the big reveal and see what they've got. But something that I'm curious about is ownership of these slides, because his girlfriend just kind of took them from an attic she was cleaning out. I think they would belong to the estate, not her, but she just happened to take them. So
some people have made that argument. Yeah, so Adam Dew says, it was his friend's sister who was cleaning up a place for an estate sale, and supposedly this box of photos had been slated to be thrown away. So they were in the throwaway pile, at least one version of the story. And she took them out of the throwaway pile and kept them. But the question is, like you said, and she threw them in her garage. They sat there for 10 years until she looked at them again. And, the question is, who does own them rightfully? And that is a good question, because there is monies involved. And, Adam Dew in my interview did admit that. He said that, they've had an opportunity to be in a big magazine, U.S. magazine, but they turned it down because they didn't want to pay. And they did want to make some money off these slides. He says it's his production company that now owns the slides, along, which I guess the woman who found him and his friend are a part of. But
well, and I'm assuming he created this production company for this film, being that the company is called Slidebox Media.
Exactly. So I think you're right. And to create the documentary. Now, I find him a very cool, level-headed guy. I think that he even admitted, the reason I need to recover some money because I've spent a lot of money on this, and that makes sense. Perhaps it's not the best way to go about it for the credibility of the whole story, but and like you said, it's not going to be able to prove. And it's unfortunately certainly not a smoking gun like Tom Carey had told people at American University, that he had the smoking gun of alien existence. And best case scenario, it's nowhere near close to a smoking gun.
Right.
So
a slide of something that looks similar to an alien that may or may not have been taken around the same time as Roswell. Oh.
Yeah, so a lot of controversy. Yeah.
So here's my question, though. I mean, did Adam just decide to publicly reveal that he's involved in this? Because if I'm remembering correctly, in the trailer for the documentary that they released, there's a scene where they show his various name badges for different sporting events that he'd covered and stuff, and his name was blurred out of those.
Yeah, I don't know. That has been mysterious, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to clarify what his role was, and because it's been weird. I mean, there was a video interview of him that was released when they did their May 5th announcement thing, and that they were going to have their event. But that video was then taken down, and in that video, he said that he was a researcher in this case. But it didn't say he was one of the owners. So it's been really strange who he is and what he is. But he clarified to me that, yeah, he's got this production company. He's been filming sporting events and stuff like that for a long time. And that's why his friend came to him. And so now this production company is part owner. So he's been involved since the get-go. And then they got Tom Carey and Don Schmidt involved because they're the premier Roswell researchers, so I think so his background's finally clear. It seems like maybe in the past he was unsure as to whether he wanted to come forward or not, and finally has.
An interesting saga.
Yeah, so that part has been really weird and confusing too. That's another reason why I wanted to interview him. But I like all the guys involved. I'm a little skeptical of what was going to result. I'm not the only one, because it's gotten a lot of people talking on the internet, and I think a lot of people are just kind of aghast and like, this doesn't seem to be as big of a deal as you guys are making it out to be. It's not as going to be as important evidence. But then again, Roswell is what especially Tom Carey and Don Schmidt live and breathe, so I could see how they would be personally very excited about it. And of course, Jaime always likes to put on a big show, so that's why he's doing this. He's putting on a big show, and I think Adam just is genuinely perplexed and wants to know what's going on here. And it's just kind of a roller coaster thing that's happened here, and so we'll see.
Cinco de Mayo.
But I don't think even Robert Hastings wrote something about his skepticism recently about these slides on UFO Chronicles, and he even says he doesn't believe there's any deception going on, that all of these people are genuine in their beliefs. He just doesn't agree that that they have something here that may be definitive. So there you go.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there you go. There's lots of other news, of course, that we weren't able to get to. You could go to openminds.tv to see that. However, I guess, did you have any other news you wanted to talk about?
I want to get to the interview because this is an exciting interview.
Yeah, I love this interview. So let's go ahead and do that. Thanks, Jason, for joining me with the news. But let's go ahead and hear from Jim Weiner about the Allagash abductions. The first thing I wanted to ask you about was that first UFO sighting that you caught with the binoculars. How that happened and what you saw.
Well, that was, I think it was like the second night on the lakes. We had just moved up from Telos Lake, which was the southernmost lake in the lake system on the Allagash. The Allagash is composed of lakes and river. And Telos is the first lake that you come into when we flew in on a bush plane and landed on Telos Lake. the following day, we were up in Chamberlain Lake, which is the largest of the lakes. And we had just broken camp, or just landed at one of the campsites. There was about 10, maybe 12 other campers, and it was right at sunset. And there was I think there were two gentlemen who were on the beach. Their kids were out on the lake still in a canoe, and it was up there. It gets pretty black at night, so they were worried whether the kids would be able to find the campfire. So we were all looking for them with binoculars, seeing if we could spot them somewhere. And one of the gentlemen who was on the beach with us saw this light, and it was, if you drew a direct line from where we were to where this light was, it probably was right over Eagle Lake, where we were a few days later. And it was over the treetops. It looked like a very, very bright light. It wasn't. It was much brighter than a planet. And one of these guys said, "Hey, what's that over there?" So we looked and saw this thing moving. It was moving, I think, from right to left. So that would be traveling east to west, and it was maybe 100 feet over the treetops. Hard to tell at that distance. And I trained my binoculars on it. And when I looked at it through the binoculars, it just looked like a large, spherical, round, yellowish white light. But I noticed that it had this kind of odd quality to it. It was not like the type of light you see coming from an airplane, a wing light or a spotlight or anything that. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And then after observing this thing for maybe 30 seconds, it just winked out. And I thought, well, that was pretty strange. But I didn't really think anything other than that. I mean, we were busy trying to find these kids on the lake, so our attention went back, and we finally, the kids showed up, and everything was okay. And that was all that happened that particular night. But the light was witnessed by all the other people that were at the campsite besides us. Mm-hmm. And the only other thing that I thought was a little odd about this light was that it winked out from the outside in. It kind of imploded on itself, which I thought was a little weird. But at that distance, I'm sure there could have been a rational explanation as to why you'd see that kind of effect. I don't know. I really didn't think about it that much, mm-hmm. except that it seemed a little odd, but that was about it.
Mm-hmm. Now, on the night that you all had your major experience, you really wanted to emphasize how dark and silent it was. So I wonder if you could speak to that, which was, I think, you were emphasizing that because that was the need and the importance of the fire.
Yeah, up there at night, when you're up on the Allagash at night, it is so black that you literally cannot see your hand 6 inches away from your face. That's how dark it is. And, you cannot see anything. It's black. And so if you're going out on the lake, the only way you can find your way back to your campsite is you have to have a beacon. There just isn't any other way to do that. So that was why we had built a very large fire, because we wanted to canoe across to the other side of this area of the lake that we were camping at. We were at the Smith Pond campsite. We wanted to go across to the other side of the lake, which was probably maybe half a mile to a mile away. And so we knew that and we were planning on fishing for a couple of hours. So we built a fair-sized fire so that we could use that as a beacon to find our way back to the campsite. Mm-hmm. It's also very quiet up there. There's no frog, there's no tree frogs or crickets. It's just total silence, and every now and then you might hear a loon cry. But if you're downwind from another campsite, you can literally hear people whispering almost, and that's how quiet it is. So you have to if you can picture this in your mind, you're in complete blackness, and it's very, very quiet.
Mm-hmm. So what were when you saw the object, the round object, what were your impressions? If you could describe what you saw?
My first impression was this was the same thing I saw 2 nights prior. It had the same quality of light, and this time it was much closer. I mean, I'd estimate maybe 200, 250 yards away, and it was hovering above the treetops. I'd say maybe 100, 200 feet at first. It was as big as a house, and it had this quality. It was I remember it as being a yellowish white light, almost like a sun, and it had this weird, very weird roiling effect. It was moving as if it was alive. And in those days, I was studying pottery at Boston University, and I'm expert at firing kilns. And so when you look in a kiln at about 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit, the atmosphere inside of the kiln it's almost like a roiling flux. It's like what do they call that state of matter? It's not a solid. It's not a liquid. It's a
plasma.
A what?
Plasma.
Plasma. Thank you. It's like a plasma, and it has this life to it. It moves and it roils, and that's exactly what this thing reminded me of. It was in constant motion, and it was like a little sun, like a little miniature sun, just floating above the treetops. It was completely silent. It made no noise at all. And we were close enough that if this thing had made any noise whatsoever, we would have heard it. But it was absolutely, totally silent.
Hmm.
And my first impression, aside from that, was, I've never seen this before in my life. I've never seen anything like this. Mm-hmm. And it definitely was not a helicopter. It wasn't making any noise. It didn't, we thought maybe it's a weather balloon, but weather balloons, this can't be a weather balloon. It's alive. It's moving. And so we really didn't know what it was. I mean, we were sitting there for a few minutes, probably 5 minutes, just trying to figure out what this thing could possibly be other than an airplane or a helicopter or a weather balloon. Mm-hmm. And that's when we decided to signal it.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think of that idea to signal? Were you on board with that idea?
It was my idea to do the signal because in 1972 or 73, I was in undergraduate school in northern Pennsylvania, Mansfield University, and I was out with some friends one night, and we got lost out in the woods in northern Pennsylvania, and we had seen some lights in the sky just after dusk, and we signaled those with a flashlight that was in my glove compartment, and one of these lights responded by going off like a bright amber flashbulb. So I remembered this previous experience and thought, well, in 1972, 73, we used a flashlight to signal something in the sky, and it responded. Let's try it with this and see what happens. And so Charlie Foltz took the flashlight and knocked off an SOS to this thing. And as soon as he did that, immediately thereafter, this tube of light came out of this thing and came right to our canoe. I mean, you have to try to picture this in your mind. It's pitch black. You're in a 16-foot aluminum canoe. So when this light hit us, we were like, deer being jacked by a searchlight. We lit up like a Roman candle. And then it was immediate. As soon as he signaled this thing came this weird beam of light. I don't even call it a beam. It's more like, it was like a tube of light. Came out of it and came right to our canoe. I mean, we were in the crosshairs. And at that point, we decided that whatever this thing was, we didn't want to deal with it out in the middle of the lake. We decided that this thing was, any more contact with this thing was going to happen on solid ground.
Mm-hmm.
Because where we were in this lake, we were kind of in it's not so much of a swamp, but there were trees, stumps, and parts of trees that were coming out of the water. And the waters, even in the late August, the waters still were very cold. And we were afraid that if we fell out of the canoe, if we tipped the canoe and fell into the lake, we'd get caught on one of these underground or half-submerged trees and wind up drowning. So I thought it was a very prudent and smart thing was to get out of the water as quick as possible. So that's when we started to paddle back towards shore. And luckily, we could still see our campfire, so we could make a beeline straight for the fire.
Mm-hmm. So, and then is this where there was like a memory lapse where it's like the next thing you know, you're standing on the shore?
Well, I remembered, and Jack remembered, because we were in the center of a canoe, and Charlie Foltz had a paddle, Chuck Rack had a paddle, Jack and I were kind of paddling with our hands. And I remembered, and Jack does too, looking back to see where this thing was, because when it first shined this light on us, it was at the end of the southeast end of the lake, which was, like I said, about 200 yards away. And after it shined this tube of light on us, it came out over the water, dropped down to, like almost level, just over the water, and started moving towards us. That's when we decided it was time to hightail it out of there. And I remembered looking back to see where this thing was and thinking, in my mind, it was like still fairly far away, and instead it was almost right on top of us. I mean, I thought to myself, there is no way we're going to get away from this thing. None at all. And Jack had the same impression when he was trying to remember what was going on. And then the next thing we all knew was our front of our canoe hit the beach at the camp, and we were aground. And we got out of the canoe, and this thing was hovering just over the water. It was probably like 30 feet over the water, maybe not even that high. And this beam was coming straight out of the bottom of it onto the water. It was almost like it was sitting on this beam of light. And I remember thinking it was close enough that I could hit it with a stone. If I threw a stone at it, I could hit this thing with a stone. But we just stood there watching it, wondering what was going to happen. And then it winked out from the outside in, almost like a camera iris when it closes. And then it was gone. It was like just vanished. And then an instant later, we saw the beam came on again, and this thing followed this beam. It was like it projected this beam out ahead of it, and then followed the beam up into the sky. And then it would wink out again, and then a second later it would come on again, only it would be much further away. And it was climbing the whole time. So it gave you this odd impression, almost as if it was walking up a staircase. You'd see at one point, then further away and higher up, and further away and higher up, and then it just zoomed away, and it was like a star. And this was only a matter of seconds. This thing was really going fast. There was no sound. There was no sonic boom, no sound signature, or engine noise at all. It was totally silent. And in just a few seconds, it was like a star in the sky. Mm-hmm. And then it curved off to the southwest and disappeared over the tree line.
Mm-hmm. So, I kind of want to ask. I made some notes because I didn't want to get into too much, but I'm just so curious about.
Oh, ask whatever you want.
Yeah. So you guys, I mean, this of course was a big deal, and you guys were talking about it amongst yourselves and to everyone you saw, and for a while.
Yeah. Well, that night we didn't talk about it at all. We were so exhausted that all we wanted to do was go to sleep. Which was odd. You'd think after an experience like that, you wouldn't be able to stop talking about it. But we were so exhausted that we didn't even think about it. And what else was odd about that, Alejandro, is that when it was gone, we went back to the campsite, and all that was left of the fire was embers. Yet the last time we saw it, this thing was like still blazing when we were, paddling towards it, trying to get away from this craft. It was still a blazing fire. Yet when we got back to the shore, all that was left was embers, and we didn't even think about it. We were like, nobody said, "Oh, what happened to the fire? It was blazing a few seconds ago. Why isn't it blazing now?" We didn't even think about it. And we were just totally exhausted. So we went to bed. The next day we were like talking about this whole thing, like what it was, and like it was definitely an unidentified flying object. I mean, we had no other explanation as to what this thing could possibly be. We asked that very next morning, one of the rangers came to collect their garbage. They come every morning to collect campers' garbage so the bears don't become a problem. Otherwise, the bears get in your campsites. And we asked him if anybody else had seen anything the night before, and he gave us some ridiculous story about searchlights being shined into the sky at a Millinocket theater, which happened to be like 90 miles away, and bouncing off the upper atmosphere, and that was what we saw. And I could tell from his face, from the way his eyes and his facial expression, this guy was lying through his teeth. He knew exactly what we were talking about, but he didn't want to admit it. Mm. That was my impression. Mm-hmm. And, you don't have to be an expert to know when somebody's lying to you. You get that feeling from facial expressions and the way they behave, and, they kind of look a little sleazy to one side or something when they're trying to feed you a story. Well, that was the impression I got from this one ranger. So I think that they knew this thing was up there, and that and other people probably had reported something in before. And that was, when we first landed on the lake, when you first land on these lake systems, a ranger is in your campsite within minutes because they check you out to make sure you're not a fugitive, that you have camping equipment and supplies to survive in the wilderness, all that stuff. And they also want to see where you plan on camping. You have to show them a map, and you can only camp at designated campsites. And when we showed him our campsite plan, the ranger told us that first day that we could not go to this section of the lake because they had a very dry summer, and we wanted to go trout fishing at this pond. It was called Haymock Pond, and it was connected to the southern end of Eagle Lake, where we had this UFO experience, by a brook called Smith Brook. And the ranger told us that we couldn't go to this pond because the brook that connected the lake, Eagle Lake, to Haymock Pond was unnavigable because it was so dry all summer long. and we thought, oh yeah, we said, yeah, okay. And then after he left, we were like, no, we're going to go there if we have to walk, because that's where the trout were. That's why we were in the southern part of Eagle Lake that night, because we had planned on going to finding the brook the next day and getting the haymock. Well, a few days after, further along the journey, we had come to this one area of the river. We were now on the river, and there's a 2.5 mile stretch of rapids called Chase Rapids, and some of these rapids are class 4, and they have a ranger station there. And for people who don't want to run the rapids, they provide portage. They'll port your gear and your canoe to the other end of the rapids and then drop you off. So my brother Jack and I had never done rapids, class 4 rapids before. We had a lot of camping gear and photo gear and stuff, and we didn't want to lose it in a rapid accident. So I had approached one of the rangers to ask if they would portage our canoe and our equipment. And the ranger said to me, and I'll never forget this, he said, well, I don't know what you're worried about. There are no rapids right now. so I responded. I said, well, that's kind of odd because according to my map here, there's 2.5 miles of Class 4 rapids. And so the ranger said, well, we don't have rapids right now. We just had this huge storm come through the Allagash system about a week and a half ago, and it dumped so much water on the lake system, on the Allagash, that all the rocks are underwater. There's no rapids. So you don't have to worry about them. And I looked at him and I said, well, I'm a little confused here because when we first landed on Telos Lake, the ranger, Cram, his name was Everett Cram, he told us we couldn't go to fishing at Haymock Pond because the water level was too low. So if the water level was too low only a few days ago, now you're telling me that there's so much water on the lake that there's no rapids. I don't get it. And he looked at me and he went, you're one of those guys, aren't you? And I was like, one of those guys. And he said, yeah, you're one of those guys that said they saw a UFO. And I said, well, yeah, we did see something. I don't know what it was, but we definitely did see something. And he turned his back and walked away from me and wouldn't talk to me anymore. So that was when I started thinking, okay, something fishy is going on here, which, I mean, the only conclusion I can come to is that they were deliberately trying to keep people away from that part of the lake system because this thing had been there and had been seen before.
Something
and
fishy.
They didn't know either they knew what it was or they didn't know what it was, but they did want to keep people away from that part of the system. So there was another strange thing that happened, which I actually didn't talk about at the 2008. On the first day that we were on Telos Lake, and this is actually an important piece of the puzzle. As I said earlier, when you land on the lake, the rangers come and they check you to see if you make sure you're not a fugitive and that you have enough supplies to survive in the wilderness. Well, after the ranger left, we were getting ready to make supper. And this guy shows up. This young guy looked like maybe he was late 20s, early 30s, in a canoe. And I'll never forget what he said. He came to our camp. He beached at our campsite. He comes in and he goes, geez, guys, I'm wondering if you can help me. I'm in a pickle. So we're like, oh, you're in a pickle. What kind of pickle? I mean, he literally said he was in a pickle. So he said, well, you know, I came up here thinking I could live off the land. I could like catch fish and eat fish every day, but I haven't been able to catch anything. This guy, like, he didn't have a sleeping bag. He didn't have a tent. Wow. He had a canoe and a paddle. And so we said, well, sure, yeah, we'll feed you. You can stay with us, you know. So we took him in and we shared our dinner with him. The next morning, actually that night, he slept away from us about 10, 20 yards on the ground. And the next morning when the rangers came to collect our trash, I'll never forget this as long as I live. Every square millimeter of this guy's exposed flesh was covered with black fly bites. I've never seen anybody bitten so badly in my life. Wow. And so when the ranger came, we were like, hey, you need to go talk to this guy down here because he doesn't have any equipment. There's no way he's going to survive up here. So the ranger went down and they had a little conversation, and then he went off. They left with this guy, and I have no idea what happened after that. But I thought that it was odd that they would allow somebody to be on the lake system with no survival gear. And at the time it didn't seem a big deal, but it became. It seemed to have a little bit more importance years later when we talked to John Norsine, who he's deceased now, but we met him years later at Anne Cuvier's house in Newport, Rhode Island, and he claimed that he had our report in his hand like within 24 hours after we made it, and we said, why would you have our UFO report? And he said, well, I was doing some things with the military up there, and we were running a TTR, and you guys walked into the middle of this thing, and that's how I know about it. And I said, a TTR, what does that mean? He said, tag, trace, and retrieve. And I said, I have no idea what that means. And he said, this was 1976. He said that he was a part of a team that developed a field device, a subcutaneous device that they were testing on field operatives so that they could track them in the field. And they were testing these devices up that same area at the time we were there. And so we said, well, so what are you saying, that this thing was yours, that this was your craft that we saw that? And he said, no, that wasn't ours, but he said that his people thought that these devices that their operatives were testing may have been attracting these craft. I don't know whether that was true or not, but it made me think of this guy that showed up at our campsite the first night with nothing to survive on. I thought, well, I wonder if this guy was part of this exercise. Mm-hmm. Anyway, John Norsing is a brilliant scientist, and he seemed to know everything about our case. So
interesting.
It's very interesting.
All right. So later on, then, and how later? But you started having sleep problems, and that opened up this whole new can of worms, I guess, huh?
Yeah. I had an accident in '78, 2 years after the Allagash incident, which left me with these lower back problems, and I took some brain damage, which left me with epilepsy. And so, over the years following, I'm trying to remember when these things actually started. It was probably in the early mid '80s, somewhere around there. I started having these nightmares, and they were getting worse and worse. And I mean, I call them nightmares, but I'd swear that these things, I was wide awake and conscious when they were happening. But at the time, I could only describe them as nightmares, and at that time, there was, I hadn't made any connection between these nightmares and this Allagash event. I mean, to me, they were just nightmares. But I started having more and more of them, and it started to affect my seizure condition, where I would wake up in the middle of the night and I'd be in this kind of terrified state, and it was causing my seizure activity to go up. So I had to go back into the hospital for some tests and observation, and one of the team members at the hospital, I'm trying to remember his name, it was Jonathan Silverman, I think, or Silverberg, I think it was Silverman, was one of the team psychiatrists. And he came in and asked me about these nightmares, and at first I didn't want to talk about them, because, I mean, everybody has nightmares. What's the big deal? But he wanted to find out more, and eventually they dug these nightmares out, and it turned out that he knew Dr. John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist, and had just had dinner with him recently. And he came and said, well, these nightmares that you're describing are very similar to these nightmares that Dr. John Mack is getting from some of his patients. And that's when he asked me if I had ever had seen a UFO. And when he asked me that, I was laughing because it sounded so ridiculous. I was like, why are you asking me about this when I'm here for, epileptic seizures? And he said, well, I just need to ask you that, and I think you need to talk to either Dr. John Mack or somebody in the field about this UFO. And then I said to him, well, yeah, actually, I did have a really close encounter with a UFO in Maine, and I told him about that, and he said, well, I think you should talk to somebody. And he was the guy who actually got me in contact with Raymond Fowler, who documented the case and wrote the book, The Allagash Abductions. And he was also the one who got me the psychiatrist was also the one who got me in contact with John Mack when he was just starting Peer. So that was the connection. And I didn't realize that at the same time I was having these nightmares, my twin brother Jack was having them too. But he wasn't, we'd see each other every few months or so, and he'd say, well, how's things going? I go, well, yeah, I'm having some nightmare problems. And he'd go, yeah, me too, But we still, at the time, didn't make the connection. It really wasn't until we went through the hypnotic regression with Ray and who's the hypnotist, Tony Constantino, that this stuff actually came out.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess some of the things that you remember, for instance, your experiences were a little different, and so maybe you could talk about that and kind of the nature of what you remember, and maybe some specific, like the hands and the instruments.
Well, I was the first one to go through the hypnotic regression sessions with Ray and Tony. And I thought, hypnosis to me at that time was like, a carnival show kind of thing, so I never really considered it as being something valid. To me, it was always like, entertainment or something. And I never thought that people really get hypnotized. And so I voiced that opinion to both Ray and Tony, and they said, well, it's not a carnival show, it's not magic, it's not, we can't command you to cluck like a chicken. It's really just a state of deep relaxation that helps you remember things that you may not normally be able to remember, or to remember things in more detail. So that made a lot more sense to me. I was like, oh, okay, that's all it is. That makes perfect sense. So, so the first time they did the hypnotic regression session with me, they actually had a lot of problems, because when I started remembering this stuff, especially what I remembered on the craft, I became very, very agitated, extremely agitated, to the point where they were worried I was going to have a seizure again. So they had to keep bringing me out and then taking me back, and bringing me out, taking me back. And I felt that they got very little out of me. I mean, I kind of remembered what their faces looked like. I remember thinking they looked like bugs, kind of like insects. But, this, in hindsight, it could have been like a mask. I mean, they had these kind of big looking like bug eyes, and they didn't seem to have much facial features. They had very little of a nose, and just a slit for a mouth, and like holes for ears. I remember the drawing. I did a sketch of it, and it kind of looked like an ant head, if you can imagine what an ant head looks like without the antennae and the mandibles. That's how I remembered seeing them. I remember they were very thin. They had very thin arms and necks. They were about as tall as we were. Some of them were a little taller. Some of them were a little shorter. Very thin. They wore almost like a skin-tight. I remember the clothing they wore reminded me of like skiers' clothing. Like skin-tight clothes that skiers wear. Almost like a rubberized, or not really rubberized, almost like a spandex or something. I remember that. I remembered some of the devices that they had used, but that was all. I mean, I was pretty much in a state of terror the whole time. That was my feeling. Well, every time I would try to remember something, all I remembered was these things are going to kill me. I got to get out of here somehow. I've got to get away. And that was all I could really. It was more of a just a total feeling of terror.
Mm-hmm. And
that I was going to be cut up and dissected any second.
Mm-hmm.
And thank the gods that didn't happen, but that's the way I felt.
You all were regressed separately.
Yes, and we didn't talk. We all promised Ray that we would not communicate anything that came out of any of our independent regressions, which we did. We agreed not to do that, and we did not do that. So everything that came out of each person's regression was totally unknown by the others.
So you also, how did you feel then when you did finally, when was it that you heard what the others had said? And
it was at the end of the regression sessions, Alejandro. After about a year and a half, they did multiple ones. I think I did 2. Jack and Mary did 2 or 3. I can't remember how many Charlie and Chuck Rack did, but it took about a year and a half before Ray and Tony Constantino got through all of them, and then one day they called us all in and said, "Okay, guys, this is what came out of these regressions. This is what Jack said. This is what Jim said. Charlie said. Chuck said." And the only thing that, there are some details that are different, slightly different, but basically you all have the same story. It's as if you remember pieces. One person remembers one set of parts or one thing. Nothing is really in, what's the word I'm looking for? Real time. You get a piece of something and then another memory, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's in chronological order. So, but anyway, they said, look, the only thing that we can conclude from your regression testimony is that you guys experienced an abduction. That the odds of 4 people giving this kind of information independent from one another is the odds are astronomical that this could happen by chance. Mm-hmm. So it was their conclusion that we had undergone an abduction. Mm-hmm. And we were like, we really almost didn't believe it. Mm-hmm. It's like, or we didn't want to believe it.
Yeah.
You I think you'd feel better if they said, you have a brain tumor and you were hallucinating. But, what can you say?
Yeah.
The odds say this is, the very high probability that this is what happens. So you gotta accept it and deal with it. Mm-hmm. And without another explanation, a sensible explanation, what else can you do except accept it?
Mm-hmm. So you all did art too. You were all artists, different mediums. And all of your art was affected. And what sort of art did you do, and how was that affected?
At the time, I was working as a ceramicist. I was doing a advanced degree program at Boston University. It was actually a joint program through Boston University and Franklin Institute, which was in Boston. And so I was, it was a 3-year advanced degree program in ceramics, and that's what I was doing at the time. I was training to be a production potter. And up to that point, up to the Allagash, I was, making typical production pottery, plates, pitchers, cups, coffee cups, that sort of thing, tableware. And immediately after that incident on Eagle Lake, I started having these very weird, I call them insights, where all of a sudden, I'll give you some examples. Like the very next day, we were breaking camp that next morning, and a flock of geese was flying overhead. It's late August, so they're starting to go south now. And I never thought, I grew up in Pennsylvania. I was a country boy, and I see ducks flying all the time, and you see them flying in a V, but you never wonder, oh, why do they do that? I mean, they're ducks. That's what ducks do, or that's what geese do. And I remember looking up at that thing, at this V of geese flying overhead, and all of a sudden it was like I got hit by a lightning bolt. I knew why they do that, and I had never really thought about it before. But that morning, I knew why they do that. The physics of why geese and ducks fly in V's, and it's because the lead bird, when they flap their wings, they create a circular air wave, almost like a vortex, which all the other geese ride on behind it. And so it expands like in a V shape, like waves from the bow of a ship. And so really the only bird that's using any energy in flight is the lead bird. All the other birds are riding on this air wave. And I just instinctively knew that. And then later, when I got back to Boston, I actually researched it and found out, indeed, that is the case. That's why they do that. So that was one thing that came into my head. And then a couple of days later, we were sitting at the campsite, and I was looking at the tree bark patterns. And all of a sudden, I instinctively understood the physics behind how tree bark patterns come about. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I kept having these kinds of things over and over and over again, and I realized that I could use the processes involved, these natural processes that occur in nature, in the clay medium, either as techniques to form clay pieces and create surface texture and integrate the firing techniques all together so that they were all totally integrated. So when we returned to Boston, I started working in this vein, trying to figure out how to work these processes of nature into my artwork. And that's what I spent the next 2 years doing. I had already been at BU for a year doing production pottery. I just stopped doing that. I almost got kicked out of the place because I changed so abruptly. And it took a lot of convincing to be able to stay and follow through with it. But the faculty and the deans at the college eventually trusted that I could pull it off, and my work changed completely. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely like day and night.
There was lots of Southwestern stuff, and then some weird stuff too, right? Was it?
Yeah, it was. Well, it's hard to explain unless you really see it. And I'm sure Charlie will show a couple of pictures. I'm sure I have in his PowerPoint presentation. There are pictures of the work I did immediately returning to Boston, and I think one of the slides has a picture of the stuff I was making before we went up, and then the stuff after, and it's the difference is just unbelievable. And there was other stuff too. In addition to the ceramics, the change in my ceramic artwork, I became obsessive compulsive about ancient temple architecture. Somehow I had it in my head, and I don't know where this came from, but I just became obsessed with the belief that ancient temple sites were actually macrochip technology. That they functioned as macrochip computer, almost like a computer motherboard. And I just became obsessed with this, and I'm still obsessed with it. Thank the gods that recently, in the past few years, there's actually an abundance now of research that has come out that actually claims to say, these people claim that they have studied some of these sites in depth, and indeed the structures conform to a type of microchip technology or electrical technology, either in some of these sites being physically acting as capacitors, or, for example, Teotihuacan, Mexico, the Pyramid of the Sun in 1906 was being excavated, and they found layer of mica, subfloor, so it wasn't decorative, a foot thick, covering the entire subfloor area of one of the upper levels of the pyramid. So this thing wasn't decorative; it was there, and the type of mica came from Brazil, which is 1,000 miles away. So it was brought there specifically for its properties. And mica is an insulator in the electrical industry. It's also an insulator against gamma rays. And in the years after it was first discovered in 1906, there are a number of other pyramids in the Teotihuacan complex. Same kind of thing, same mica, same location of the mica. So if it's not there as a decorative element, then what is it there for? Mm-hmm. So it has to be some type of electrical property, either an insulator like a capacitor or something else. But so this obsessive compulsive belief that I've been carrying ever since the Allagash now seems to be getting more and more scientific support. And that just, I mean, I wasn't even thinking about that before the Allagash, and then after the Allagash, I was obsessed with it. And Jack, if you get to interview him today, he'll go through his artwork, which I think Charlie also will have some pictures of, and his artwork changed completely, radically.
Yeah. So I've got to talk to him in about 10 minutes.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to ask you about other effects in the aftermath. Do you feel you're still having experiences?
Well, it's possible. I mean, I still have. They're not as frequent as they used to be, but maybe 3-4 times a year, I will hear what Jack and I and Mary refer to as the hum, where I'll wake up in the middle of the night and there's this very odd. It almost sounds like an electrical sound. I'll see if I can give you an idea of what it sounds like. It's there's a low baseline hum. It's kind of like a, and then on top of that, there's this modulating sound, which almost sounds like a number of different instruments, and they go. And for years, I thought it was something in the house, like a refrigerator or a hot water heater or a clock. And there have been times when it's so, you can't locate it. It's like coming from everywhere. But it's coming from outside my head, not inside my head. And I've actually gotten up many, many times and completely turned all the electricity off to the house at the panel. So there's no refrigerator running, there's no clocks running, there's no hot water heater running, nothing is running, and I still hear it. And there are times when I'll go up to visit Jack and his wife in Vermont. We'll be sitting outside in the backyard in the summertime, and all of a sudden Jack will go, "Hey, do you hear it?" And Mary and I'll go, "Yeah," and we hear the hum. So that is ongoing. And then there's other times when I will wake up in the middle of the night and feel a very malevolent presence in my bedroom. I can't see anything, I can't hear anything, but there's this palpable presence and it's a malevolent presence. So I still have those kinds of experiences. I've been with this low back stuff. There's been times when the last 2 times, in fact, this last one, which was just recent in October, November, and then a year before, where when I went to the doctor asked me, where I had fallen, because of the nature of the damage. And I said, well, I didn't fall. I went to bed. And I remember one of the orthopedic surgeons, well, I told you, I mentioned that earlier, right? Yeah, he said, did I mention that earlier?
I think so.
Yeah, so he thought I was dropped. He thought I fell off a ladder or something. I fell down some stairs and didn't want to talk about it. And I was like, no, I didn't do anything like that. So I don't know. But I don't have any conscious memories of seeing craft. I've seen craft since the Allagash, but that was years ago. And I think the last abduction experience that both Charlie and I underwent was in 1995, when we were living in Brookline, Massachusetts, on Green Street. And he'll talk about that at the presentation.
Okay.
That was the last major event. In fact, both of us underwent hypnotic regression with Bud Hopkins on that event. Mm-hmm. And it appears from the regression, and they were both independent of one another, that we had both undergone another abduction event. Well, so that was the last big event that I can report to.
Thank you so much to Jim for doing the interview. I just got to admit, I really love these guys when it comes to the Allagash abductions. They're four buddies, They're just really genuine, down-to-earth guys. They're funny guys. I love their sense of humors. And they're just straightforward, regular guys when you talk to them. They're a lot of fun to talk to. And it's another reason I'm so enthusiastic about this case is that I believe these guys. And what they're saying. So, and something really strange happened here. So I'm really excited to do the second part of this and show you Jack Weiner's interview or do the audio of it next week. And our video production guy, Michael Klein, is working on taking the Jim Weiner, because we did an interview with him backstage, and these videos that we have from Jack and Jim, and putting together a video with all of their interviews, kind of a special Allagash piece we're going to put on YouTube. So a lot of fun. So we want to get as much information to people out in as many forms as possible about this case, because it's a really cool one. It's an important one, really interesting. So thank you to Jim. Otherwise, we are back to doing weekly spacing out. So you probably saw we had one up Friday. We'll have one up again this Friday. And barring, vacations that we have going on here and there. In fact, I think Maureen's going to be on vacation. I don't know if we'll be able to do one this week. But barring vacations, we're going to have them out mostly every week. So back to our regular schedule for spacing out. Also, of course, you can get all of our news and information at openminds.tv. Also, all of those videos I highly recommend. I mean, it's a historic thing. Bob Lazar doing a Q&A. We're not going to have that possibly ever again. So get the DVD, whether you're skeptical or not. Take a look and see what you think, and let us know what you think on our Facebook or wherever. So you could get the DVD for Bob Lazar, and if you do, also get the George Knapp one. And especially for those of you who are skeptical, or either way, I think you want to hear the George Knapp one, because he talks about why he believes the case. And if you know George Knapp, he is a very discerning, skeptical journalist. He's won many awards because he looks at things. He wants proof and evidence, and he lays out in his talk why he takes Bob Lazar seriously. So I think you need to get that. And then if you want the whole package, then you also need to get the debate and Jeremy Corbell's video, because in the debate you could see Jeremy and Stanton talk about and they both do a great job. So Stanton, of course, is very articulate and compelling in his own right as to why he's skeptical of the Lazar case. So really good stuff. So you can check out the DVDs online. You can also see on our website on the upper right, there's a big banner that says Video Portal. In order to see other videos on a streaming, kind of our own little Netflix, we have where you could subscribe to this for a low monthly fee, $5.99, and you have access to a bunch of videos, including all of the lectures for the first 3 UFO congresses that we did. So what, like 2011 and 2012? I think we have at least up there now. So we've got a lot of lectures up there. We're putting more every month also. So go check that out. I want to say thank you to Caleb Hanks, who does the music for the opening and close. You can find a link to him on our radio page for UFO Chronicles. And I want to thank all of you for listening. Thank you very much. And we will be back next week with Jim Weiner. Yeah, it's Jim next week. Thank you all for listening. Have a great